Hello and welcome to the Reviews Brothers, where we are going through the complete A to Z of PS1 Hidden Gems, finding 10 games for each letter that you may have missed. We are on the letter R now, and this was a tough one, as there's quite a few games starting with the letter, making it hard to narrow down. But I think I have a half decent selection of games here, and I hope there's at least one that you didn't know about. Now, how about I shut up, you press subscribe, and we take a look at some games. Here's a funky vertical scrolling shooter called Retro Force. You are part of the Retro Force, made up of 4 pilots who have to stop an alien invasion. The alien bastards have turned up and stolen some crystals, and you're trying to get them back, and you're sent to various time periods, and you've got to fight hundreds of enemies with some massive bosses in order to get the crystals back and to return to the correct time period. You get to choose from any of the 4 characters, and for the most part they play pretty similarly, but with slightly different loadouts. Each character has 6 weapons and a screen clearing bomb right from the get-go. There are 4 standard shots. You've got your usual laser, a spread shot, a lightning shot, and you can switch between these at any point. And as you probably already know, each weapon tends to have a time and a place that it's best suited for, so you'll be swapping between them quite often. You also have 3 different bombs, one that fires a bit in front of you, one that is slower and drops more below you but has a much larger blast radius, and one of them is more of a laser attack that just attacks directly below you in a very concentrated but powerful beam. All of these weapons can be power-upped with items that you find, though these power-ups are actually quite scarce, so it's not easy to get to full power, but each one does become noticeably more powerful and they are fun to use, but be careful as you will lose power if you die. Which you will, as there are a ton of enemies all over the place here, and they do take a few shots to take down. You'll have to have your wits about you to know if you should be using your bombs or lasers, as they're mapped to different buttons. But what's cool here is that by pressing the L2 button, you can actually change your height between 2 planes, either ground level or the air. This means you can use your usual weapons to take out ground enemies rather than bombs, but you do have to be careful as you've got to load more obstacles to avoid the lower you are, as there are buildings, rocks, trees and other things not to crash into. Thankfully, the controls are decent, so avoiding things isn't too much of an issue, though your ship can be a little floaty and it doesn't stop immediately when you let go of the button, but this is something you do get used to fairly quickly. Graphically, the game is decent, and going through the different time periods is a nice way to keep things interesting. It's all polygons, and although they're pretty basic, I didn't really have any complaints, and I do really like the explosions here. You can even play this game with up to 3 friends in 4-player co-op, but of course I don't have any friends, so couldn't try this out. If you're a fan of shooters, then this is well worth a go. Fighting game time now with Rakugaki Showtime. This is a very unique arena fighter from Square Enix, or actually just Enix back then I think. This, like I said, is very unique in just about every way. I couldn't really tell what the story, if there really is one, was here, but you get to choose from a handful of characters with a ton more left available to unlock. What's cool is that the characters are a mixture of original ones as well as ones that I recognise from various other games, including Cloud from Final Fantasy and one of those kids from the Mischief Makers game on the N64. I'm sure many of you will probably recognise more of the characters, but I'm not all that familiar with Square games as I'm not much of an RPG person, or should I say Enix. The gameplay here is also very unique, which, while it's pretty simple, is actually incredibly addictive. Each fight takes place in a large square arena, one that will usually have loads of obstacles and items in it, as well as you and sometimes 5 or 6 opponents at once. You only have one attack button, which you use to punch or do a jumping attack, but there's not really anything in the way of combos or anything like that. Your attack just tends to knock enemies away. The main focus here is picking up pretty much anything you see, including the enemies themselves, and throwing them into each other. Different things you pick up will do different things. Some things just do damage, other things explode, and some things create gravity-changing bubbles, and some will even launch you right into the air, and so on. It's always easy to aim your throws, and one of the main things you'll want to get are the yellow faces that appear. Throwing these into enemies makes them change expression, until the face starts to flash. Once the smiley faces are flashing, just pick it up and you'll unleash a massive special attack. These are awesome, and each character has a few different unique specials, though I couldn't really tell if you have a choice as to which one is used or if it's random. Either way, they always look very powerful and can defeat enemies in just one blast, along with a really cool looking replay. Graphically, the game is awesome. I like everything here, and the way it looks like it's made out of paper is so unique and interesting. The animation is jerky, but that's deliberate, and the gameplay is still super smooth. Seeing all the familiar characters here as if they've been drawn by kids is just cool, and it's a good thing to have here. The controls, as mentioned, are simple. You've only got a couple of throw buttons, a jump button and an attack button. You can move the camera around with the shoulder buttons too, and it's all very responsive and fast moving, just as it should be. There are a few game modes, but you'll want to spend most of it in the main tournament mode, if that's even what it's called. Here you'll fight a series of progressively tougher battles that do actually get pretty damn tough, and you'll start to unlock those extra characters. There are of course multiplayer modes too, which I can imagine would be a blast if you weren't like me and had someone to play them with. But even if you don't have a friend, this is still a really fun game to play on your own, and one that is well worth checking out. Wacky racing time now with Running Wild, a strange on-foot racing game starring a cast of anthropomorphic animals. There's nothing complicated here, you just choose from a number of animals, from rabbits and pandas to zebras and elephants, and even some unlockables like a T-Rex. As you know, each character has their own stats in terms of speed, turning, acceleration and weight, which affects how they all handle. You choose your character and then choose if you want to do a circuit, which is basically a case of racing all the tracks and seeing if you can win them all, a time trial, single race or challenge. In challenge mode, each of the tracks have their own boss character, who is much faster and harder to beat than usual racers, but if you do win that circuit, you will unlock them as a playable character. Sadly here, and probably the worst thing about the game, is that there's not many tracks at all. You only get a handful and that's it, and they're all available from the start, and you'll have seen everything there is in about the first hour of playing. But the tracks do have a nice variety. You'll be in cities, forests, snowy tundras, and even inside a volcano. The tracks are littered with obstacles that will slow you down, some being just part of the scenery, with others being weapons that other races can use against you. Of course, you can also get those weapons and power-ups and they'll help you out. Most of them are just out in the open, with green arrows that give speed boosts, ghosts that make you invincible, and a bird thing that lets you fly for a few seconds, making it easier to get past obstacles. You'll also see various spinning arrows of different colours, usually in a row. If you collect all of these, you'll get access to either more of the power-ups that you've seen before, or sometimes more powerful ones that you can use against the other racers, like a mud weapon that turns the track into mud for all of the other racers except you, and it slows them down. And of course you get the usual homing shot that can slow them down as well. It's not always easy to get the power-ups though, because there is sometimes some dodgy collision detection, but you will need them if you're going to beat the boss characters. Controlling your character is generally pretty good. You still use the X button to accelerate, but you also have a jump button, and you can do sharp turns with the shoulder buttons here. And you'll need to be doing a lot of jumping here, as there's plenty of obstacles all over the place. And really, that's all there is to the game. It is a very simple racing game, but its crazy cast of characters and the fact that you're running on foot, for some reason, makes it really stand out to me. And it is actually genuinely fun to play. I really had a lot of fun going through it, and I think it is well worth a look. At first glance you'd probably think it's going to be terrible, but actually it's really not bad at all. If robbing the rich and giving to the poor is your kind of thing, then you might want to check out Robin Hood The Siege from classic budget developer Phoenix. This is an incredibly simple gallery shooter game where you play as Robin Hood apparently, though you'd never know it as you don't actually ever see him throughout the entire game. You fight your way into Sherwood Castle to steal some dollar bills, y'all, after which you'll need to do it again in order to save Maid Marian, but again, you'd never know that as you don't even get so much of a picture of her at any point, just a bit of text saying that you saved her. But how does it play? Well, it's a gallery shooter essentially, so you control a cursor and each level throws dozens of enemies at you who will all come on the screen from either the left or right and run in a straight line. You just have to point your cursor onto them and press the shoot button and they all take one hit. If you run out of arrows, just press the circle button to reload. Done. You can also use the L and R buttons to move the screen left and right. There's 5 areas that you fight in: a forest, outside the castle, a small town, and then in the castle itself, which is in fact only actually 4 levels, for those people good at maths out there. To beat each level, all you have to do is survive a minute and a half, which really isn't very difficult. There's only a few enemy types. There's blue men who just run on the screen and run off again, red ones who run on and then they will stop to shoot you, and then there's the ones that are close to the screen who slash at you with a sword. And once you've beaten the game, you'll also get catapults that appear and take a whole quiver of arrows to defeat. None of the enemies are hard though, and they don't do much damage, and I never actually lost a level. Once you've beaten all 4 levels, the game just loops, gradually getting harder and harder, but realistically, if you're like me, you'll more likely get bored of it before you actually lose. The graphics aren't particularly impressive to look at and look like a bunch of stock images and animations. In fact, the enemies that are closer to the screen look awful. The perspective is also just seemingly random, with some people being bigger than buildings and some looking like they're about 1 foot tall. So why is this game here? Well, it is kinda shit, but it's actually still kind of fun if you like this kind of thing. It is a budget game through and through, so even before I played it, I had very low expectations, and to be honest, I did kinda get hooked and ended up playing through it nearly 5 times, which is only about an hour to be fair. Technically, it works fine. I mean, the controls are responsive and the hit detection is good, and if you want something to kill a couple of minutes, this is actually not the worst thing you could play. But if you want something that's actually substantial and feels like a proper game, then this probably won't be for you. Japan time now with Remote Control Dandy, which has very kindly been given a fan translation that you can find on the World Wide Web. This is a very unique game that is part visual novel. Well, actually it's not really, it just has loads of really long cutscenes that you can't skip. But when you get past those, you control a huge skyscraper-sized mech and have to complete various missions like getting rid of bombs and of course fighting other large mechs. The story goes that evil mechs have started appearing all over the world, and no one knows why. You play as some posh kid who happens to be the heir of a mega tech company that produces good mechs. Well, it made one anyway. So, of course, rather than let the adults take charge of the mech and defeat the menace, it's down to the weird kid, and you have to learn to use the mech and save the cities that are under attack. It sounds kind of generic in terms of story, but the gameplay here is very different. You are always in control of the little kid, and you can run around some rather large open areas that are all under attack, but if you press the select button, then you take control of the mech, sort of directly and indirectly. You see, as the kid, you have a remote control for the mech, which conveniently is the same as a PlayStation controller. So you control the kid controlling the mech with a controller. Get it? Pressing select goes into mech mode, and here's where it gets interesting and really fun. You use the L and R buttons to move the left and right legs, so you'll need to learn to time this properly so you don't step too far with one leg and fall over. After a bit of practice, you'll get the timing down and will be moving around at some speed. You need to use a combination of both buttons to turn and crouch as well. Then you have the face buttons, which control your arms and other functions. You'll need to use some quite complex combinations of all these in order to move around the maps and fight enemies, as well as do things like pick up objects and take them to different places. But the interesting thing is that you can play the whole game from the kid's point of view, so you can only see what he sees. Now, you will automatically keep an eye on the robot while controlling it, but if it gets too far away from you or goes around a corner, you'll need to stop controlling the mech and control the kid so you can run closer or up the street to get a better vantage point so you can actually see what the hell's going on. This is a great way to keep the challenge fresh, as well as giving it some awesome cinematic views for the action. In fact, most of the time I was more concerned with making it look cool than actually being in a sensible place for the fights. Of course, needing to be in the right place to see what's going on can be tricky anyway, and it means that you will accidentally and inevitably do some damage to everything around you. This doesn't go down well with civilians, and you'll fail a mission if you do too much damage to the city. Also, each mission has a monetary reward, and any damage you do has to be paid for and comes out of your pay at the end of the mission. But you'll need your money as you'll want to upgrade your mech to get tougher and more sophisticated abilities. The gameplay is really fun, and it does feel like you're controlling a massive mech. The graphics are great too. Now be prepared though, as there are a lot of cutscenes here, and while you can speed the text up, you can't skip any of it, so it takes more than a few minutes to get through most sections before you get to the action, and the game is very slow to start with a ton of tutorials, which is something I always hate, but this game kind of does need it because of the way it plays. There are also some really nice environments, and the robots do all look cool with fun animation. Also, the draw distance in the cities is really impressive and you can see for miles, well, for a PS1 anyway. Everything here is voiced and it's all in Japanese, which is great, and the music is decent too. Overall, it's just a solid experience. This is a really fun, unique game that has a stupid name, but is great fun to play. And speaking of remote control things, here is RC Stunt Copter, which is an RC Stunt Copter simulation from Titus. Yeah, those guys. The premise for this game is incredibly simple, and there is no story. You are controlling a stunt copter and you're given various objectives on each level, and the faster you do them, the better the medal you get. Of course, the goal is just to get a lot of gold. The missions range from flying through various checkpoints, popping balloons by flying into them, completing slaloms, or even shooting things with your stupid gun. There's quite a few missions here, and the game is incredibly challenging. The main challenge comes from the controls, which I guess are deliberately complex, and I assume accurate as to how you'd control a real RC copter. You use the left analog stick to change your height as well as turn left and right, and you use the right stick to change your pitch and angle, so of course you need to use a combination of both sticks to move around. Kind of like a first-person shooter, but way more complicated than that. Now, for me, this game reminds me of things like Octodad or Goat Simulator, or that running one where it's really hard to control your limbs, and that's kind of the whole point. The missions on paper are very simple, but you'll be spending a good few hours getting used to how it all plays, and I'll be honest, I still really don't understand how to properly turn, though I do think that anyone has a real one of these will probably find that it's quite accurate. Graphically, the game is actually decent, though it's pretty simple. It's bright and colourful, and there's little to no pop-in, as the areas you're in are all pretty small. There isn't much in the way of sound, it's just whirring and some ambient noises, though you do have a commentator who's always speaking on every level. I do have mixed feelings about this guy, as he's constantly telling you what you do need to do, but like every 5 seconds he repeats himself, and he will insult you when you're shit, which for me was often. But he is sometimes quite handy for letting you know what you should be doing and kind of giving you hints as to what you need to do. The music that is here is good, though there's not a lot of it. As you play, you'll unlock new copters to play as. These all control differently, and I'm assuming some are better than others at certain things, but I'll be honest, I sucked with all of them, and basically always had to use the training wheel things. Overall, this is quite a simple simulation game, but I did have fun with it. It's equal parts frustrating and fun, as it will take a long time to get good at, but the few times I did manage to complete missions properly, I felt like a badass. Check this one out if you have the patience.
Okay, you're at the edge of the level. Head back to the middle.
Now, if you've always wanted to play Red Dead Redemption and Sekiro, but only have enough money for one of them and can't decide which one you want, then you might want to just buy Rising Zan Samurai Cowboy instead. This is an awesome action game where you play as the samurai cowboy in a world that is part Wild West, part feudal Japan, and all totally awesome. The story is basically what you probably expect. You go back to your town to find that some evil bandits have taken it over, so you set out to kick their heads in and restore justice, as any good samurai cowboy would do. But of course here the outlaws are all ninjas, sumos and other questionable Japanese stereotypes. You'll be exploring some really cool levels that have a great mix of Japanese and Western influences, from Wild West towns to saloons that are decorated in Japanese style to trains that are also decorated the same way. These are all packed with character and cool details, and as well as enemies of course, and the combat here is really fun, if a little stiff. You've got 2 weapons, your 6-shooter and your samurai sword, and you're pretty damn good with both. Your gun has unlimited ammo and of course attacks from a distance. You can lock onto enemies to shoot them, but they can and often will block your attacks, so it isn't as easy as you'd think. Also, when you're shooting, you can't move, so you're open to most attacks. Your main weapon though will be your sword, and you've got a standard combo that you do by hammering the attack button, but by double tapping a direction and then pressing the attack button, you'll do a special slash, which does loads of damage but uses some of your blue energy. But don't worry, as this recharges over time. You can also press triangle to go into a frenzy mode where your speed and power are dramatically increased, and you also get an awesome funky song to go along with it. The enemies come in a load of varieties and they're all fun to fight. Each one has their own strategies to defeat, and you'll need to learn to dodge and block with the shoulder buttons, but I never once got tired of the combat and especially loved fighting the dozens of bosses throughout the game. There's just so much personality here. The game does not take itself seriously at all, and the script is full of actually funny jokes. There's loads of quick time events here as well, but these are actually well done and always get you a cool cutscene to go along with them. The graphics, as you can see, are fantastic. I really love the art style and the variety in just about everything here. The cutscenes are all well done and very hammy, and there's plenty of blood and gore in here as well, which makes the combat even more satisfying. You've got to shout out the music and sound here as well, which are all fantastic, with great voice acting and an awesome disco cowboy vibe. This was the first time I'd played this game, and I had an absolute blast. It's easily one of the best games I've discovered while making this series, and I would absolutely say that this is a must-have for any PS1 owner. And if swords are your thing, then you might want to check out Ronin Blade, also known as Soul of the Samurai. This is a 3D action game where you choose to play as either a male Ronin called Kataro or a female ninja called Lin. Guess which one I chose. The story is different depending on your character, but mostly boils down to a tale of corruption, deceit, lies, which is just another word for deceit I suppose, and revenge. The game is a large mix of exploration and action. You'll spend a lot of your time exploring towns and villages, talking to people and looking for clues, and finding out what you're trying to do. For example, early on you'll need to find an empty house where you've heard someone is hiding out, so you've got to talk to every villager you come across until you get enough clues to narrow down where this house is. Often this is literally a case of talking to every single person in the town, and then you know what's what. In between this though, you will be fighting an unlimited supply of enemy ninjas and samurai. You'll usually know when you need to fight, as you get a different loading screen when enemies are going to appear. Here you'll need to make sure to press triangle to take your weapons out before starting to attack. Then, taking down enemies isn't really too much trouble. You've got an attack button as well as a block button, and you'll want to get used to blocking, as counterattacks here are the way to go. You've got a few combos you can do, and you actually level up as you play and learn new special attacks. What I didn't expect though was the blood here, and although it's not massively gory, it is enough to really make your attacks feel like they're dangerous. In fact, the simple combat is actually really fun. You have a load of sub-weapons here too, most of which are throwing things, and you'll find these as you explore, along with health items, and you can easily swap between all of these and use them in the middle of a fight. It's great fun. The graphics here are really good. The world is all pre-rendered and fixed camera angles, but there's loads of enemies that all look decent, and your characters look good and the control well enough. My biggest complaint with the game is probably its lack of direction. You do get a map that fills up as you explore, but the only marker here is the one showing where you are. You don't get anything really to help you guide you to your next objective. This did mean that I was running around in circles a lot, pressing the interact button on everything and anyone, which would eventually work, but I didn't always feel like I'd figured anything out or earned anything, more that I just sort of brute forced my way through the game. Having said that though, there are plenty of clues that you get from villagers, so it is more me being stupid and impatient. Also, thanks to the fixed camera angles, actually exploring can be tough. Not being able to properly see where you can and can't go off the screen, as well as going around in circles by accident, even on some of the smaller areas. But again, those smarter than me, which I hope is most of you, won't have any issues. The most annoying thing for me though, which isn't actually a problem with the game, is that I was recording footage for nearly 2 hours of this before I realised that I hadn't actually pressed the record button, hence why there isn't very much variety here, sorry. Either way though, this is a really cool story-driven game that will last you quite a while and has 2 slightly different stories to play through. It is well worth your time. Racing action now with Rollcage Stage 2, the sequel to Rollcage of course. This is an arcade-style futuristic racing game where you choose from a load of cool cars and race around a load of really cool tracks, with your only goal being to come first in the tournaments, so you can unlock more cups and better vehicles. So yeah, it is pretty much a simple racing game on paper, but that's actually how I like them, and you know what, this is a really damn fun game, and that's all that really matters. The cars are all quite similar in terms of how they look, having a flat body and large wheels, but this is for a good reason. Most of the tracks are full of loops and tunnels, and most of the time you don't have to worry about crashing into walls, as you can just drive up them. You'll often need to do this as there's loads of power-ups and boost plates literally all over the levels, so you want to get up some speed, then make your way up to the ceiling so you can get the boost pads up there. It's so much fun, and it means that it doesn't matter if you fall over, as you always land with your wheels up. As mentioned, there's also a load of weapons, and in fact most cars have their own unique loadouts, as well as the usual racing game stats of speed and handling. This really does make a difference to the vehicle you choose, and you'll soon find a weapon set that suits you, and a vehicle you prefer, and the weapons can often make up for vehicle shortcomings. For example, there are some slower vehicles that have better homing weapons, so you can attack the other racers easier in order to slow them down and catch up. What's also interesting here is that in the tournaments, you get points for attacking other racers as well as depending on your finishing position. So there's times where you don't actually come first in the race, but because you shot more enemies than the other ones, you still get more points. This is a really cool mechanic, and it means that even if you're having a bad race, as long as you can shoot the crap out of your opponents, you actually still have a chance of winning it. I really like the graphics here. There's loads of varied tracks, which is always welcome, and they do all look good with plenty of detail. The draw distance is very good too, and I never had any issues seeing what was coming up. They have enough weapons and boosts all over the place for you, and the game gets pretty damn fast, and I never had any frame rate issues either, which is awesome. Some tracks are very short, lasting only a minute or so, but they were always fun to race on, and though I will admit some of them are a bit samey with the usual neon looking dark skylines, I did find that this one was hard to put down, and I always wanted to keep playing. Of course, this would be another great game with mates if you have any, which I don't, but I would like to give this a go against some friends. If you're a fan of racing games, this is definitely one you want to check out. And finally for today, here is Rogue Trip Vacation 2012. Set in the futuristic year of 2012, Rogue Trip is a cross between Crazy Taxi and Twisted Metal, interestingly before either one was a thing. There's not really a story here, but the gist is that you choose from an awesome array of crazy characters who are basically all futuristic taxi drivers slash travel agents all in one. This is the year 2012 after all. Your job is to find and pick up a single tourist, of which there is always one per level. Once you've got the tourist, you'll start to make money right there and then there's landmarks on each level that you need to drive them to and park up on just at the right angle so they can take a photo and give you even more money. Then you move on to the next landmark until the tourist has a picture of each one. Once that's done, then you just have to blow up the rest of your competition and move on to the next location. Of course, this is a competitive market, so if you have the tourist, everyone will be out to get you, and if you're destroyed, then you'll lose the tourist and have to wait to respawn so you can blow up whoever has picked them up and now is taking them around. There's also weapons that, if you are hit with them, you will automatically lose the tourist without even blowing up. Each vehicle has the usual speed and handling stats, as well as their own powerful special move, and of course there are loads of weapons that anyone can get, like homing rockets, machine guns, and even meteor strikes. The game is suitably wacky with a great frantic feel to it, and the levels are large enough to not feel cramped and overbearing, and also the enemy AI is just right that you have enough breathing space, and you can get the tourist back when you need to. You also get a radar, which is essential as it shows you all enemies, as well as tourists and photo opportunity locations. You'll spend a lot of time looking at it. There's also weapon and health replenishing sites in the levels which you have to drive through to use, but these cost money, so don't go crazy with them. The graphics here are very good, but they're not amazing. It is an early game and you can see that, though it looks more than good enough, with a nice draw distance and a steady frame rate. The characters are all that late 90s exaggerated features sort of design, I kinda like it. and I like that all the vehicles are clear homages to things like The Simpsons, Ghostbusters and Mad Max. There aren't a huge amount of levels here, which is a shame, and I would have liked more stuff to unlock, but what's here is definitely enough and it will keep you entertained. And as I said too many times in this video, this would be a good one to play with friends. Maybe I should buy a friend. If you like Crazy Taxi or Twisted Metal, I reckon you'll love this. So there you go, 10 games for the PS1 starting with the letter R that you might not have heard of, and if you have, then well done to you. Which one is your favourite, and what other games could I have included? Don't forget to tell me how much of a loser I am if I didn't include the game that you were specifically thinking of. Now, all that's left for me to say is thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.